Round 10 in Montreal, the Canadian Grand Prix, a historic race at a historic track, and one that's been around on the F1 calendar since the 70s. Max Verstappen has won the last 3 races here, but will McLaren end that streak this weekend? The good news for us watching at home either way is this is a race that usually gives us some excitement. You can pass here thanks to that long backstretch with the DRS zone heading into the final chicane, along with a few other parts of the track that make passing a little bit easier. And it does look like it'll be sunny all weekend, but you never know when a rainstorm will pop up around here. And if you remember last year, a wet track can really add some chaos. But even without the rain, there's still an 83% chance of a safety car historically. So there's a lot of opportunity for us to get a good race on Sunday. For the race itself and what to expect, I'm thinking it's probably another weekend of McLaren dominance. It won't be as hot as we've seen with some of the previous races, so a little bit of good news there for some of the other top teams, but it's still going to be hot enough for tire degradation to become a factor. So not only does McLaren have the advantage there, but it's also a track with a lot of slow speed corners, which is another strength of theirs. I just can't really see anyone else challenging them this weekend. You have to ride the curbs with all of the chicanes, so that's a bad recipe for Red Bull. Mercedes has done better at this track than others, but something's been off with them since they adapted their new front wing to the new flexi wing regulations. And Ferrari's probably going to suffer a lot with all of the slow speed corners. It just looks like it's McLaren's weekend yet again. So if it's McLaren, which driver's coming out on top? I know, I sound like a broken record every time I say this, but like it's been before, like it'll probably be moving forward this season, the race win is going to come down to who qualifies ahead of the other and who is ahead coming out of the first few turns between Lando and Oscar. Now, I don't know if qualifying will matter as much as it has in the past as long as both are on the front row. It's a tricky start where the track kinks to the right and then goes into that left-hand turn, but there's just not really a second phase to the start because of the short run down there, so everything comes down to that initial start off the line. And if you get that wrong, you can tumble down the order very, very quickly. And it's not always a guarantee that we see the driver on pole or even the driver starting P2 to come out with the lead after those first few turns. And remember, 2016, we saw Sebastian Vettel start in third and get around the 2 Mercedes ahead of him going into that first corner. So it's definitely something that's possible and something for the 2 McLaren drivers to watch out for if they start on the front row. Between the two of them, though, it's such a toss-up deciding between who's going to come out on top. I think I like Oscar. When you think about qualifying, when you think about the race start and the pressure that comes with it, you have to think he'll have the edge. And this is such a tight circuit. Kind of what we see in Saudi, not as tight, but still pretty similar. And you just really have to nail down the entry and exits out of the chicane. So with all of that together, I just like Oscar to have the edge in qualifying and to come out away with the lead at the start of the race. But as long as Lando makes it onto the front row, he's still got a chance, and you never know what can happen. With us likely looking at another dominant McLaren weekend and another race that comes after the technical directive for flexi wings, what does the rest of the season look like for the other top teams? Now, there's already been word that Ferrari is scaling back on their development for this year and turning their focus to 2026, and I'm honestly not expecting it to take long before Red Bull and Mercedes do the same. There was just so much hope riding on the flexi wing change and what that would potentially do to McLaren and how it would bring them down. And now that we're past it and McLaren's still this dominant, the reality is setting in. They might just be untouchable this year. We're a few races away from the halfway point of the season, and McLaren's almost 200 points ahead in the constructors' standings. And the driver's standings are a lot closer, with Max only being 49 points behind Oscar, but that's still a pretty sizable gap when you consider how good McLaren has looked at so many different tracks this year. And then you think about how much Max hurt himself with that penalty in Spain. If he gets another penalty point in this next month and gets a race ban, how much that'll hurt him. It's a tough task for anyone to catch up to these 2 McLaren drivers in the driver's standings. And when you really think about it, it's really the smart move for Mercedes, Red Bull, Ferrari to really turn their attention towards 2026. There's a huge opportunity with the regulation changes, and if you wait too long, you lose that opportunity. And if you really wait too long, McLaren's going to have a big enough lead where they're going to start mailing it in for the rest of the season and turn their focus to 2026. So the time is now for these top teams to switch their gear to 2026. Going to some of the other drivers this weekend, The pressure's on for Yuki Tsunoda and Franco Colapinto. Both of these drivers really need strong performances to quiet down some of the rumors about their futures. And honestly, those rumors are pretty deserved. Both of these drivers are at teams with high expectations. Now, of course, Red Bull and Yuki, it's warranted there. Alpine, it might be a little out of touch. But regardless, the expectations are there, and both of these drivers are not meeting their expectations. But not only has their pace been underwhelming, but they're both making some pretty costly mistakes, whether it be in practice, qualifying, the race, where they're having these crashes and just really hurting their chances. That has to come to a stop, and the results have to start coming in for both of these drivers. Now, I don't think either needs to necessarily finish ahead of their teammate, especially Yuki finishing ahead of Max, but they need to at least finish close to their teammates to save some of these rumors and save their future. Sticking with the midfield teams, I'm thinking Williams has a bounce back weekend. Spain was obviously disappointing for them, but it was expected given that track's characteristics, and this one should suit their car better. The best of the rest this weekend probably comes down to either them or the Racing Bulls, who I also expect to have a strong weekend. I'm eager to see what Sauber looks like after their strong weekend in Spain. I am a little bit worried for them that it was more track specific in Barcelona, but we'll have to wait and see. I don't think this track suits Haas particularly well, and I'm expecting them to struggle a little bit and probably finish somewhere close to the back of the pack. And same for Aston Martin. But the bigger story for Aston Martin this weekend really isn't about their car and their performance. It's about Lance Stroll coming back from this mysterious wrist injury that has now lingered for 2 years. Now, he of course missed the Spanish Grand Prix because of that wrist injury from a bike accident 2 years ago, which apparently has been bothering him for weeks, which is a little concerning. He's had some surgical procedure performed on that wrist in the last 2 weeks since the Spanish Grand Prix. No word on what that procedure actually was, but it's kind of shocking he's coming back so quickly. My gut feeling, it's all for show. This is his home race. It's going to kill any driver to miss that moment that comes once a season unless you're American or Italian. But I think if we weren't in Canada, Lance would not be racing this weekend. I'm not expecting a lot out of him. Of course, it is Aston Martin who's almost expected to struggle at this point. But remember back at the start of the 2023 season when all of this started and Lance came back way earlier than expected after getting the first surgery? It was tough to watch. Now, he did end up finishing P6, and that car was a lot better than the Aston Martin that we have today. But Lance was clearly in pain and struggling and really a shell of himself that weekend. And now that we have this hindsight, knowing this injury has lingered 2 years and has required an additional procedure, why are they risking screwing this up again? Why not let Lance recover the way he needs to, let the recovery run its course, bring him back at an appropriate time, and not risk screwing this up even more? But hey, when your dad owns the team, those rules go out the window. All right, before we finish up, I want to talk about a few off-the-track headlines that we got from Ferrari this week. I'm not sure what triggered it, but there's been a wave of rumors coming in about the team. Fred Vasseur could be let go at the end of the season. Charles Leclerc is thinking about exploring his options and leaving the team. Lewis is liking Instagram posts about the car lacking the consistency and pace he needs and there being a disconnect between himself and the team. I think most of this, outside of Lewis on Instagram, is just the typical rumor mill we see with Ferrari when things aren't going well for them. We'll start with the Fred rumor. Look, he's not going anywhere after this year, and Ferrari took the extra step to come out and say the rumors were untrue. And this is a team that is historically quick to make a team principle change when things aren't going well, and Fred is starting to get to that prove it or you're out point. So I'm not saying he's completely safe, but the timing just doesn't make sense right now. Making that change now, or at the end of the season, and bringing in a new team principal right as the regulations change really isn't a recipe for success. And it's not the best starting point for that new team principal either. And who knows, maybe next season starts and Ferrari has the new regulations figured out and they're back on top. It's probably unlikely based on what we're hearing about the new power units and where Mercedes is compared to everyone else, but it's still an unknown. So if anything, it makes a lot more sense for the team to just wait, see where they stand next year, and then make those changes after next year if they feel like they need to. Does Fred deserve to lose his job, or at least be on the hot seat, though? He started as team principal in 2023, so he's only 3 years into the job. P3 in the Constructors in 2023, P2 last year, and they're currently P2 at the moment again. So the results under his direction haven't been that bad, relatively speaking. But at Ferrari, if you're not winning races and ultimately championships, it's not good enough. and it's going to cost you your job at the end of the day, which you get to an extent because of the history and success of this team and their expectations that come with that. But at the same time, it's been 17 years since their last constructor's title, 18 years since their last driver's title. Those expectations haven't been met in a long time. So how much of this falls on Fred? I think he's done a great job with the personal management side of things, specifically dealing with his two drivers, whether it was Leclerc and Sainz or now Leclerc and Hamilton. And obviously, in both situations, both drivers look at themselves as the number one driver, and Fred's done really well managing those expectations without damaging the team's dynamics. But when you look at this team and where it's gone wrong, it's clearly with the development of the car. Sure, they have their strategic errors from the pit wall, but that's not what's costing them. They can win a race here and there, but they just can't make the car good enough to compete on a consistent basis and really put themselves in contention for championships. And ultimately, that is something that falls on Fred. It's his job to get the right people into the facility that can compete for championships, and he's fallen short in that department when it comes to the people actually designing and building the car. But even with those shortcomings, he's at least saved by the hope that they can get it right with the new regulations. So I think if we do see a change from Ferrari, it'll probably be Loic Serra. Also don't agree with that for the same reasons. Just don't think that they should make that move going into the new regulations. But it might be a move that at least saves face with the media and just shows that they're doing something to try to fix the situation. But for Fred, he should at least be fine for another year. Charles Leclerc isn't going anywhere either. He also came out and shot down the rumors at Media Day, and honestly, I believe him. It's hard to imagine Charles not in a Ferrari. The team believed in him at a young age. He believes in them. There are family connections, and there's a strong connection that's just been built for years. But more importantly, if Leclerc did leave Ferrari, where is he going to go? McLaren's set through at least 2027. Mercedes looks like they're about to sign George long term, and they have Kimi on the other side of the garage. Maybe there's a chance with Red Bull, but would Charles really want to be teammates with Max and sign on to drive a car that has been notoriously undrivable for everyone not named Max Verstappen? The only possibility I can think of is if one of the midfield teams really nails the new regulations and becomes a much more appealing destination. Aston Martin's probably the most likely out of that bunch with Adrian Newey. Maybe Alpine, maybe Williams. It's just hard to imagine right now. Maybe I'm wrong in a year or two, but I expect to see Leclerc in Ferrari for a long, long time. Lewis liking the Instagram post about the dysfunction at Ferrari was interesting. He's since unliked it, but in case you didn't see it, the post basically said that the Ferrari project has been a failure, the car lacks the consistency and pace he needs, and there's a disconnect with strategy calls and team communication. It goes on to also note that Lewis is basically out of his element being a Brit in an Italian outfit, and his legacy alone can't win races without the performance and synergy from the team. None of this is really surprising to hear. It's stuff we've all been noticing and thinking, and it's honestly true at the end of the day. But Lewis knows what he's doing here. He's been in this sport for almost 20 years. He's a global icon. He knows how this works with the media. And he knows how to pull strings when he wants to, and that's what this is. Lewis is obviously frustrated with how things have gone this year, and I don't blame him. The results haven't been there outside of the sprint race in China, and there's this obvious tug and pull between Lewis and the team. And I think what Lewis is doing here is putting his foot down, making his feelings known, and pushing for the change that he wants. Now, it's not going to help anything in the short term, but whether it's right or wrong, it's probably going to lead to the change Lewis is pushing for, which is probably a new race engineer with how things have been going. But at the end of the day, the team's going to cater to Lewis over a race engineer or anyone else on his side of the garage when it comes to this stuff. All right, that'll do it for today's episode previewing the Canadian Grand Prix. I will be back on Sunday with a race recap, and I'm expecting we'll be talking about another McLaren win and what Sunday meant for the Drivers' Championship. But if anything, we should still get a lot of action behind them. Thank you to everyone for tuning in and listening. Till next time.